I know all three levels of government are represented here today, and I think that speaks to the importance of the work of EEDC and to your leadership. And it's just an incredible turnout in the room, and I've been very much looking forward to the discussion today and responding to questions. First, let me comment on Edmonton. And you know, this is a world-class city with world-class political leadership in the form of Mayor Iverson. I just want to acknowledge the working relationship that we have, how much we enjoy working together, and what a bright future we have here in this city. I love Edmonton. I'm unapologetic about that. I'm very clear about it. I lived here when I was a young university student. I came from Grande Cache, as Grant mentioned, and spent most of my university years in this city. And Karen and I live here as the Premier. We have a place across the river, and this is where we make our home, and this is where we are all week. And so we just love this city and enjoy spending time here. I'm not prepared to concede yet that it's utopia, but it's a wonderful city and a great place to be. You know, we've heard in the comments that Brad made, and firstly the comments the Mayor made, that when we talk about city building, we're also talking about province building, and I couldn't agree more with that. And I think, Brad, in your comments, you accurately captured my sense of Edmonton and the dynamic city that it's become, the young city that it's become. It's dynamic, it's entrepreneurial, it's innovative, it's focused on manufacturing, on research, and all of the things that I think you accurately encapsulated. This year, and I want to say this in front of the many leaders who are here in this room, this year will be about leadership, and it will be about confidence. And I'm not going to disagree with Frank Spinelli, but I'm going to turn on its head his motto, which is to say that it is what we're going to do in the bad times that are going to determine how successful we will be in the good times. And so I approach what we're dealing with an enormous amount of confidence that we have the ability to do that. And, you know, let me just start with the difficulties that we are going to face. This is going to be a very difficult and a very challenging year. And, you know, I'll start with oil prices, which of course are the elephant in the room. I began cautioning Albertans several months ago that we were in a downward trajectory on oil prices. I started doing that at $75 a barrel. What I would do right now for $75 per barrel oil prices. I spoke to the Edmonton Chamber a month ago in December. At that time, I warned about the effects of oil prices at $63 a barrel. Today, the WTI price is $47 per barrel. And we don't appear yet to have hit the bottom, at least in a predictable way. And so, you know, I don't talk about this because I'm enthusiastic about what this brings for our province. I can't talk the prices up. Beating your elephant will not make it fly, is an adage. And so we're going to have to deal with this. This is a problem not of the creation of anyone in this room, but we're going to have to deal with it. As government leaders, as business leaders, and as civil societies, it will be a challenging year, but I put it to you that it's also going to be a transformational year. You know, in terms of the scale of the difficulty that we face, let me just be perfectly clear about this. At the current revenue projections of, let's say, $62 per barrel of oil, this opens up in our provincial budget a $6 to $7 billion revenue hole. If prices persist at sub $50 per barrel, it will be even worse. And so to put that in scale, in context, and I receive a lot of useful advice from people about what needs to be done about this, and I welcome all of it. But I think there's only been a gradual awakening on the part of Albertans about what the sheer scale of this means. $6 to $7 billion equates to the entire payroll of the government of Alberta. This is not about, you know, shaving down the salaries of the top Sunshine List employees of the government of Alberta. I could terminate the employment of every single employee of the government of Alberta, leaving aside health care, and it would not fill a $6 to $7 billion revenue hole. This equates roughly to all of the money that we spend on education in this province. And so these are significant numbers, and you know, the question that we need to be focused on collectively as Albertans is, what are we going to do about this? And how are we going to use this as an opportunity for the transformation of our province? And let me just start by saying that we are tough, we are resilient, we are entrepreneurial, and we have the capacity to get through this, and we will get through this. I am confident. We've seen low prices for oil before. We will see low prices for oil again. This is a commodity cycle. We will get through it, and we will persist. And if you have any doubts about that, read yesterday's Wall Street Journal, and you'll see the comments of some of the CEOs of our largest energy companies who talk about actually increasing production of oil from the oil sands in the face of the circumstances that we're up against. However, it is a time that's going to require, on the part of all of us, caution, prudence, and discipline in terms of public expenditures, and I would submit in terms of private expenditures. It is a time to be careful, and it is a time, I think, for all of us to collectively remind ourselves about burden sharing and about the fact that we are Albertans together, and that means something. This province is not a work camp. This province has proud traditions, a proud history. We're in this together. We got into it together, and we're going to get out of it together. And I think it's important to remember that. A couple things I'll just indicate as we move forward, and I'm looking forward to some of the questions and answers, but we're going to face tough choices, and this is a government that's prepared to make it. We need, first and foremost, discipline in public expenditures, and you're going to see that from this government. Secondly, it is important that we maintain one of the greatest assets that we have that will help us get through that, and that is the AAA credit rating of the province of Alberta, which speaks to the fact that we are in a very strong financial position, well capable of weathering this storm as long as we make the right choices. And that refers to the quality of our balance sheet, our tax competitiveness, all of the things that comprise the Alberta Advantage. Thirdly, we cannot wait for high prices to return. I think it's fair to say that everyone in this province has had enough of the roller coasters. And so it's time to deal with this. It's time to put in place a long-term plan. It's time to project into our public finances that are less volatile, that provide greater certainty, whether you're trying to operate a business, as many of the people in this room are, or whether you're trying to operate as something as complex and important as the University of Alberta. It is time for certainty in terms of our revenue, whether you are speaking of investor certainty or institutional certainty. And finally, I would just say that we are hard at work. And Grant referred to the various things that I do with the government. The thing that I'm doing the most of right now is a different approach to budgeting than we have followed in this province in modern times, certainly. Typically, the budget of the government of Alberta has been prepared by the Treasury Board, working together with the Minister of Finance. In this case, the Minister of Finance and I together chair a committee, a special cabinet committee that has begun the preparation of the fiscal plan for the government for the next 8 years, starting with a blank sheet of paper. Everything is on the table. And so we're hard at work. That includes the economic projections, the capital budgeting, the operating budgeting, the existing commitments, and the revenue projections. And so that's the work that we're at. This will all crystallize in the form of the budget, which will be presented later this winter. But we're hard at it. And so again, thank you for welcoming me here. And Brad, your comments, I think, really set the stage for an important discussion that we must all have. Thank you.
Good. So, you know, you've been wonderfully consistent in your messaging, and I think it's a little bit of, and it started at $75 and it's worked its way down, and it's been a good dose of reality for for a lot of people in the room and a lot of people in Edmonton and across the province. But one of the things as a premier, you're leader of the province. You've got to put the brutal facts of reality in front of people, but at the same time, you need to inspire them. How do you balance both of those things today, especially coming into the role? You're trying to build rapport with people. You need to inspire them still, and inspire the rest of the country still about Alberta's future, but still do the brutal facts of reality. How do you balance both of those things in your daily life?
Well, it's a very good question, and I received many kind comments, and I'm not in this alone. I have a wonderful caucus that's working with me that is also trying to be consistent in the messaging. But it comes down to really two things. On the one hand, we need to be confident about our future. What is taking place in the world right now is essentially a disagreement amongst OPEC members about market share and a challenging of the increased market share that the Saudis have taken on. There's been a conscious choice by OPEC to not intervene and just to allow market forces to take their course. It's not clear to me that that is targeted at the United States. I think it's targeted at other players in the Middle East. I think it's going to have significant implications for people like the Russians. And in a sense, it's not really targeted at us. We're caught up in a circumstance not of our creation. And so this will pass. The one thing that we know about low oil prices is that they are the best solution. The best solution for low oil prices is low oil prices. And so prices will rebound. They will come back. And what is not at issue is the long-term sustainability and viability of our energy industry. For sure, we need to be competitive, as you described, and we've become less competitive because of cost increases, labor increases in particular, and there's a lot that we need to do. But in the long term, we should be confident because this province has an enormously bright future. At the same time, we need to be realistic. And, we have not done a good job with our public finances. We have been living beyond our means. We have been living beyond our means in this province. We've been budgeting based on a plug number. The plug number is the oil price, and we have essentially been drawing upon between $8 and $10 billion of oil revenue on an annual basis to balance our budget. And suddenly that has evaporated. 15% of the province's revenue stream has evaporated. And so we can't go on like this. We can't continue to budget in this way. It is producing uncertainty. You described the 1990s, the 2000s, and the decade that preceded. This is not an appropriate way for us to be budgeting. And we are living beyond our means, and in a sense, we are living on resource revenue that properly belongs to our children and our grandchildren. And so it's time, I think, for all of us to recognize this, to look in the mirror, and to realize that we have to do something about it. So it's I guess at the end of the day, it's about an honest discussion that we have to have as Albertans.
Well, I think, my experience speaking mostly with the business community on a daily basis is everyone's ready to have that conversation. I think everyone's pulled up their pants a little bit and said, it's time for us to have that conversation, so I wish you well on that. But you still target something. You target $65 today in terms of the current budget going forward. And one thing we know is every economist is wrong. It's just a matter of by how much. So how do you
all the dismal science for a reason. Yeah.
It's not entertainment anymore, that's for sure. But how do you go forward with confidence now? Not getting into the specifics of the budget, but you enter into a budgeting process where eventually you have to pick a number and kind of go around that. How does that conversation take place within your team?
Well, I'm not going to get into disclosing the budget today, and frankly, because we're not ready. And I will tell you this: Minister Campbell and myself are working as hard as I've ever worked in my life in anything, and I've never been afraid of hard work. And so we had a 5-hour meeting yesterday of the new budget committee, and we've been met up until the 23rd of December, and work carries on. And so this is challenging. It's incredibly challenging. The last projections that we received from finance projected that oil prices on average for 2015-2016 would be $65 per barrel. that opens up a $6.275 billion hole in the provincial budget. You know, the levers that we have at our disposal to deal with that are, on the one hand, expenditure containment, secondly, revenue increases, and thirdly, the acceptance of some degree of deficit financing supported by a $5 billion contingency that we do have in place. And so we really have only those three levers, and we're in the process of you know, calibrating how we're going to put forward a budget that will be a multi-year plan, not a single-year solution, not an overreaction to the circumstance that we're in, but a multi-year plan that will deal with this circumstance and will begin to solve the problem on a permanent basis.
So I don't have the history of a lot of people, but I start back at Premier Klein and then Stelmach and then Redford, and each time the Premier comes in and talks about, and they kind of eliminate the discussion around sales tax and really get off on any discussion around taxes, and they seem to kind of point themselves in a corner, kind of bury themselves in a corner in terms of the levers they can pull. Not talking about specifically sales tax, but Alberta really hasn't had that discussion on a kind of a comprehensive approach to taxation policy in quite some time. Is the market ready for that discussion?
Well, I certainly hope so, because it, you know, it's a discussion that we have to have, and you know, I come back to the reality of a $6 to $7 billion revenue hole in 2015-2016. That does not get solved in a single year. Based on what we're hearing from our economists, it equates to then a $5.5 billion hole the following year, and a $5 billion hole the year after that. And so unless we deal with this and make some of the changes that need to be made, we're talking about eroding Alberta's AAA credit rating over the course of the next 3 years, and really imperiling everything that we benefit from in terms of having such a strong province fiscally. So it has to be dealt with. This will involve pretty extensive consultation with Albertans over the course of the next several months, and you know, we welcome the views of people on taxes, and as well as on expenditure containment. It needs to be said that we have an Alberta advantage on every single element of public taxation. We are the most competitive jurisdiction in Canada, with one exception, which I'll just come to in a moment. On every level of taxation, every element of taxation, Alberta has the lowest taxes in the country by, in some cases, a vast, vast margin, not small increments. And so this is all something that needs to be discussed. I know there are many different opinions probably in this room relative to the wisdom of a sales tax. I don't think Albertans generally advocate a sales tax, but you know, I'm prepared to be educated and to hear from people in terms of the discussion that we're going to have. But it's a time for people to speak up about this, and there have been some very constructive things. Each day in the newspaper, there have been constructive comments offered by former finance ministers. There's an excellent comment, I think, in the National Post today from Ted Morton that's worth a read, and others are, you know, chiming in and have a perspective.
All the ex-finance ministers come out now. I'm not sure why, but it's
easier to be an ex-finance minister, I think, than to be a finance minister.
And they all start their discussions with 8 years ago today I resigned, and you know, they all do that, which is great. So education and healthcare. Education and healthcare are the two biggest expenditure pieces in the government, and we look at them as cost centers. But in my world, I look at them as economic drivers. We want to have the best healthcare system in the world, and we have the opportunity to actually build that with what we have in this city, certainly, and probably the best education environment around, because they are the fundamentals of healthy people, smart people that are economic contributors. So how do you, I mean, knowing that that's the target place to go after, but you still need to maintain that long-term vision of what we're trying to build here in those two sectors. It's got to be one of the biggest challenges for you.
Well, it is the biggest challenge, and let me speak truth to power. Power being the citizens of Alberta, not me as the Premier. Healthcare. In the last 10 years, the population of Alberta has increased by 25%. In the last 10 years, our expenditures on health care have increased by 100%. We've gone from 2004 spending $8 billion per year to where we are today, which is $17.5 billion a year in 10 years. An annual compounded increase of, as I recall, 7.4% per year, now consuming 48% of the provincial budget. It's not sustainable. It is not sustainable. And, you know, we all want to have the best public health care system, you know, in the country, nobody more so than me. But these kinds of public expenditures are not sustainable in our province. They weren't sustainable, frankly, at $100 oil. They're certainly not sustainable at oil prices that we're told that will be $62 next year. And so, you know, we're going to have to be a lot more efficient about it. You made a comment in your opening remarks about labor costs. You know, I'm not here to criticize, you know, doctors or nurses or teachers, but in every level of public employment we are paying vastly more than anyone else in the country, and it's not sustainable. It is not sustainable as a business model. It wasn't sustainable with high oil prices, and for sure it's not sustainable with low oil prices. You know, and so we're going to have to contain expenditures as we go forward. We're going to have to be measured and balanced about this. But there is only one taxpayer, and we're going to have to deal with this, and we're going to have to see in our partners, because I view them as partners, nurses, doctors, teachers, people in the healthcare system, the education system, the post-secondary institution, they are partners in the delivery of a high quality of public goods to Albertans. But we're going to have to start containing costs and ratcheting costs down. At the same time, you know, being innovative and leading the country.
Right. And probably putting pricing back into the healthcare system, which I think from an economics point of view, you always have to have, otherwise there are no controls. So you know, I really respect you being here today, but I also want to give you the opportunity to talk about what's next. You know, looking out a few years. Often you go and you ask your people, your staff, to tighten their belts, hunker down, you know, go through some tough times, but you need to give them a vision of what's next and what we're doing this towards. And it's probably something you haven't been able to do coming in as Premier because you got slammed with this right away. But I'd like you to give the opportunity to talk about maybe that Alberta that you'd like to grow this into someday and kind of expand on your vision that way.
Well, very, very good comment, and I welcome the opportunity to do that. And so again, I come back to a province that is confident, that is innovative, that is entrepreneurial, that is fiscally disciplined, and which really celebrates all of those characteristics, and which builds a thriving, innovative economy around those characteristics, and which is focused on the delivery of a high quality of public goods. It has to start with fiscal discipline to begin with, but certainly in the circumstance we're in, it must begin with fiscal discipline. And so I know this isn't the import of your question, but first and foremost, we need a fiscal plan that Albertans, that business owners, that people that administer our wonderful universities and colleges can look at and have certainty. And so it has to be a 10-year plan. It has to be implemented in a way that's measured and balanced and doesn't, frankly, tip us into a recession. We are not in a recession in this province, contrary to what the conference board said yesterday, and I don't think we're going to be in one. But we need to have a long-term fiscal plan to get out of the circumstance we're in, and we have to be cognizant we don't make mistakes and go too far too fast. You know, if we do that and we maintain our fiscal advantage and we are innovative and we, you know, focus, for example, here in Edmonton on a high quality of public goods, on our university. The University of Alberta is one of the finest universities in the world. It needs to be a flourishing, innovative, self-governing institution. The government needs to get out of its way in terms of the things that the University of Alberta can accomplish. and we need to make sure that it remains a center of innovation. We need to make sure that we unlock the intellectual property of researchers who are at the University of Alberta, and that we focus on venture capitalization and early stage commercialization of the intellectual property that's coming out of our universities and colleges, so that we diversify our economy, so that we get away from simply being a province that produces oil. It may always be the family business, but we have to diversify, and we need to expand the petrochemical industry, and we need to focus on other opportunities. So we need an economy that is more diverse, and I think we have it within our means. I think everybody knows my views in this room, I hope you do, about education. I was raised in a family where two things were valued above all else. One was hard work, and the other was education. They weren't negotiable. And so I think we should have the best education system in the country. I think we can afford it. I think we're innovative enough to create it, and I think we should make it a hallmark of who we are as a province. And so, we need a high quality of public goods, and this province is entrepreneurial, it's determined, it's excited. I find the challenges that we face right now to be daunting. I won't tell you that I don't. And we've been working very hard on it because we want to strike the right balance. But in the long term, you don't win a bigger lottery than to be an Albertan. And we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together. And this province is going to carry on with a remarkable future that emulates what we've done in the past.
Well, Mr. Premier, I mean so sincerely when I thank you for being here, and respect your time as well, and we have to cut this off. I think one of the things you talked about is working with the University of Alberta to help solve the problem, to help make it better. And you've got a City of Edmonton, you've got arm's length organizations, you've got economic development authorities, tourism groups, all these groups that, a crisis creates a situation where we can realize we're all on the same team, throw down the gauntlet and the challenge and say, how do we redesign this? How do we make it better? How do we make it more efficient? And you've got 1.2 million people ready to help you at any point in time here. So on behalf of everybody in the room, behalf of the Mayor and the table that we've been sitting with, I'd like to thank you for coming and being on stage with us today, have an opportunity to get to know a lot of Edmontonians, and I'd like to turn it over to you for some final words, but on behalf of myself, I'd just like to thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much. I think it's probably all been said, but we are all in this together. This is a remarkable province. We have a remarkable future. We're up to the challenges of low oil prices. We've dealt with it before. We'll deal with it again, and we'll get through this. And so, but it is a time, I come back to, it is a time for confidence and a time for leadership. It's not about one person. It's not about the Premier of the Alberta solely. I know I have a role to play. I reminded people, many of you may have heard of this, probably most of you haven't, but I've reminded people there's a Spanish adage that for a trapeze artist to succeed, two things must be believed. First, the audience must believe that the trapeze artist can fly. And secondly, the trapeze artist must know that he cannot. And so I know I cannot fly. And we are all in this together, and there need to be people with safety nets, but we're all in this together. And so, I intend as the Premier to deal with the cards that we've been dealt with, and you will see leadership, you'll see discipline, and you'll see tough decision-making over the course of the next several months as we deal with our budget. But it's not up to government alone, and it's going to take the leadership of all of the people who are represented in this room. So thank you very much for being here, and look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Premier Jim Prentice.